Hey, what's up everybody? This is Meridian Koi and I'm here with a little tip and trick video for you today. The first in what I hope are many of these. So let's get right to it. I don't want to keep this one very long. It's a pretty simple little thing. So the first tip I have for you is creating what is called a tonal riser effect or a tonal sweep. I typically use it as a sweep because I don't really like to use risers all that much in my music, even though I do know that they can create a lot of tension, a lot of beautiful tension. But for me, I like to use them as more of a granular element. And for those of you who don't know what a tonal riser or a tonal sweep is, if you break it down, it's just a rising effect that changes pitch, or a sweep that filters up or filters down from null to max frequency and vice versa. Just like a white noise sweep, or those really crazy sort of meow noises that like future bass producers and stuff like that used to use. But the way that these are made is a little bit different. They're a little bit more tonal. They tend to fit the sonic signature of the track that you're working on in a way that a lot of other sounds just possibly can't do. I learned this trick a couple years ago from a legendary trance producer named BT, who I've admired for my entire life. And I took his method and I twisted it a little bit. It was already a pretty perfect method, but I twisted it a little bit to sort of make it suit me a little bit more, make it suit my taste. And I just want to quickly show you how to do one, because they are a way to just create this beautifully lush and rich atmosphere to add to your tracks, to create that perfect rise, that perfect release, and to give your songs that fingerprinting, that digital signature that'll make them stand out from everything else. So here we go. I have a track here from the album that I'm working on. I took these out already. I'll give you a little demo of the track, and then I'll show you how I did it in the initial project file by recreating it here for you now. All it takes is a rendered wave file of the full track, not stems, just the full track, and I'll show you what to do after this little demo of the track. So I have one right in here in the project file itself, but I took it out for this process. And you'll hear how this build is sort of missing something. You know, the tension to the second half of the drop isn't really there. Same with the release. The release is sort of eh. So here's a little demo of that, just so you get an idea. Alright, see, like you have that reversed crash, and you have the crash at the end of it with that 909 clap in the middle, but it's pretty weak, right? It's missing something. So what we could do is we could go in and create this tonal effect. So all we're going to need to do that is a little snippet of audio from the very beginning of this. Probably, let's see. Yeah, 2 bars. So we're going to take that and we're just going to copy it down to another audio track. Solo that out. So we just hear that. And all we're going to do to this, and this is really insanely how crazy easy this is. We're going to get a fresh reverb. I like to use Valhalla Shimmer for this. I used to use Valhalla Room. But in all honesty, I use a preset for this, because all we're going to do is use the reverb tail to create this effect. Because the reverb is what's made up of all of that tonal information that your track is made out of. So I like to choose a nice, really lush, really shiny reverb, but you could honestly use any reverb you want. The only reason why I like to use the Valhalla reverbs is because you could create near infinite reverb tails with the plugins. Especially in Valhalla Room and Valhalla Shimmer. You crank that mix up, you just get this incredibly insane tail at the end of that can go on for what seems like forever. And what I'm going to choose is one of my favorite reverbs that I've actually just recently repurposed for one of my private stock Max for Life plugins that I've made, and that is the Deep Blue Day. And I'm going to crank the mix on it all the way up to 100. And maybe change the mod rate a little bit, just kind of bring that up a little bit. Let's see how that sounds. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's the one. Right, so you hear that reverb tail coming off of that, right? Just that almost like cinematic style reverb. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to freeze the track. It takes a minute. And then I'm going to flatten it so that way I get the rendered out tail of the reverb. And then I'm just going to erase this first part. And Ableton is pretty good about chopping off the reverb tail for you. But I always like to kind of take a little bit more out of the signal, only because in this area in here, there's still an awful lot of information from the initial sound. It isn't just the pure reverb tail. So I'm going to take out probably all of this. Well, maybe this. Yeah. I take out all of that. And the reason why I like to have such a long reverb tail, like look at that, is because you can make these as long or as short as you want to. I typically shorten it down to about there, and then I take Ableton's built-in fade markers and I kind of just, I'll go halfway, sometimes a little bit more, maybe about there. So that way I get that tail to really roll off. I'll leave it longer if I want to do a little bit more with it, but typically this is about good. And then I'll consolidate that. And now I have this beautiful tail, like it's gorgeous. So the next thing I'm going to do, for the sake of this tutorial, I'll just do the one for the build-up. So I'm going to drag it over here. Oof. And then I'm going to reverse it. And what that's going to do is create our sweep. And all I got to do is just shorten this down a little bit and then play with the fade markers again. Probably do something like that. Bring it in a little bit more. And then we have this. Now I'm going to do some processing to this in a minute, but this is what it sounds like without any processing on it. It's incredibly cinematic, right? And then with the track, it sounds like this. And then we can add another one over here and undo the reverse. And wish that would get fixed. And then redo it over here. Filter it out, and then what you get is this like this beautiful thing. In this regard, we can honestly leave it a little bit long just because it is the release. Now, there's a lot of low-end information on this, and you could honestly EQ out the low end in the reverb plugin you use if it has an EQ built in, like Valhalla Shimmer, Valhalla Room. They have EQs built into them. Although Valhalla Room doesn't have the low end control, it's just a high end, like it's a low pass filter. So what I like to do, and this is what I typically do, is I get a brick wall cut off on the low end, and I'll EQ it up to about 150 typically to remove any sub information, because these can get really muddy. These can mud up the low end of your mix really fast if you're not careful with it. And then I also like to enable a hard brick wall on the very top around 18,000, and then I'll disable number 4 and number 3, and then number 2 I mean, and then for number 3 we will create a high shelf, and I like to kind of crank that up to give it kind of like a sizzle effect, and also turn off Adapt Q, because Adapt Q is just awful. I like to kind of crank it up pretty high, like pretty outside my comfort zone. I normally only like to do additive EQ between 1 to 3 decibels before I kind of really push it, but this adds a whole new level of like shimmer and air and hiss to it to kind of give it that white noise-esque feel. And now if I play this again, you'll hear what I'm talking about. This is what it sounds like with EQ. Well, actually, let's do without it first. Here's without EQ. And here it is with EQ. See what I mean? Like, it gets rid of that. I'm actually going to pull back a little bit of that high pass filter. Maybe we'll do 115. Let's try that. Ooh. No. 150. So you see we get that nice thing, and if we add the track back in, and see, because you get the root note of the track in there, you kind of get this added layer on top of your synths. You get this like, almost like this, I call it like a hopeful feeling, depending on the key of the track, obviously, because it's in the root note, which is why you tend to use the first couple of bars of audio, because you really want to have like, you want to have it nailed down. So whatever the root note is, however long it takes that root note to play, that's what you want to chop out for your audio. And it kind of gives this extra little layer that kind of just like makes you want to like put your hands up. I love it. So then what I want to do after I do this is I usually like to add just a little bit of compression on it. I'll sometimes use OTT on this just to give it a little bit more sizzle. But in this regard, I'll kind of just give it a little bit of a harder ratio, a slow attack, fast release, and I'll plunk that right down on there, so that way it just kind of squeezes it up a little bit. Yeah. And if we blend it into the track a little bit more, you still hear it, right? Like, it's still in there. Like, you're just like, oh my gosh, like, whoa. It's insane. And what I also like to do is I like to sidechain it, so that way I get that nice, like, pumping feel. It's just like, it gives that extra little oomph to it to kind of make it pump with the track, so that way it's also not taking up a lot of your headroom for your kick and your hats and everything like that. Anything really long and tonal like that, I like to typically sidechain just to kind of keep the space open. But the nice thing about this is that you can render it down. You could render out like a full chunk of this, and you could use that tonal noise to do pretty much anything. You could create full-on sweeps. You could play with filters. You could play with your early your early sends, you could play with your late delays, you could add stuff to it, you could take stuff away from it. But I found that doing it with the reverb, like BT had originally shown, has really sort of enhanced the way that I look at layering in my tracks. I tend to not use white noise sweeps as much anymore because I could create them on top of something that will be a lot more additive to my music. And I'd personally love to see more people doing this technique because it's really amazing to play around with tonality and to give your music another layer of depth that you may not have been able to achieve before. And it could really make or break a track. You know, without it, a lot of my music sounds pretty empty to me. And I'd like to think that even though this isn't exactly a new concept, maybe a lot of people haven't stumbled across it yet. And if you found this useful, then I hope then you'll find the rest of my videos useful. And maybe in the future I'll go over how you could turn this into a riser, but because I don't typically do risers, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm sure you know how to automate pitch and stuff like that. Just do that pretty much. Just make this and then automate its pitch until it fits into your track and you have a tonal riser and a tonal sweep. You could honestly have both. It's very versatile. And the nice thing about it is because it's a part of your track, it's a sample, but it's a personal sample. It's the track resampling itself to add something to the track without actually doing it. You know what I mean? Like you're creating audio from audio, but that audio is exactly the same audio as it was before, but it's just smeared because of DSP. It's crazy, and it's one of my favorite things. It's the small things that really matter, honestly. It's the smaller things that really matter, and I hope you found this useful, and if you did, then I hope I'll be seeing that you found it useful, and let me know if you use it in your tracks. Send me some demos of it. You know, hit me up on Twitter and just tell me if you found it useful or not. And if so, then, you know, I'll definitely do more of these little videos. I do have a video that I'm working on that's all about organization, how I keep things organized, especially when it comes down to producing, and how I avoid having the whole, like, one folder, 10,000 project files curse that I feel like most of us have. And ways to beat writer's block. And that'll probably be a longer video, and if you are excited for that, you know, let me know. I really want to be able to do these, maybe do some live streams one of these days, and yeah, so hit me up, let me know. Until next time, this is MK, and I will be seeing you around. Peace.